The following is a presentation of Voyescape Media. You can find all of our travel podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com.
Welcome to episode 2 of season 11 of the Travel in 10 podcast. And today we are going to Paris, France. A lot of people going to Paris this year with the upcoming Olympics this summer. Tim, I know it's a place you've spent a lot of time before. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about your experience, how you've got to know Paris?
Yeah, absolutely. Paris might be the city in the world that I visited most often. And I've literally lost count of how many times I've been there. And that's not a brag. That's just kind of happenstance. I lived in northern France for about 6 months and played baseball and taught English and did things like that. And Paris was 59 minutes on the TGV. So it was an easy trip in. You could even go in, for an evening, and have dinner and come back. And then, since becoming a travel writer, a lot of roads lead to Paris. So, I mean, even just now in December, I was on my way to a conference in Cannes, but my flight routing went through Paris. So I ended up spending some time in Paris on the way. And so it is a city that I just love. And I feel like Paris is Paris, which may sound a little bit obvious, but it's a city that delivers. It's a city that you get there and you go, okay, the chocolate, the cheese, the Champs-Élysées, everything about it, it screams Paris. It doesn't disappoint. And I just can't imagine what it's going to be like for the Olympics. It'll be Paris just times 10, times 100. And I have never had the experience of being in a city for an Olympic Games, but I know, David, you have. So tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, if you've got an opportunity to travel to a city during the Olympics, it is unlike anything else you'll ever experience in terms of a travel experience. There's so much culturally happening. Even if you don't have tickets for the events, there's going to be nonstop. All the Olympic sponsors do these amazing sort of different hosting venues. A lot of them open to the public where there's going to be, food, drink, performances happening all the time. The city is more alive during an Olympic event than any other time. For sure, it's going to be a little more expensive for sure, and you need to plan ahead a bit more. But I'm definitely going to try and make it to Paris this summer during the Olympics, and it's one I would highly recommend.
I can't imagine. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be amazing.
I have not spent nearly as long as you there, but we were there about a few years ago now on where we'd done a home exchange where we traded houses with a French family living just outside of Paris in a small city called Dordogne. They came over and stayed at our house for about a month, and we stayed at their place. And so we traveled into Paris regularly during that 3 or 4 weeks that we were living in Dordogne.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I mean, the transit is so easy in France and around Paris. There's the local trains, there's the TGV. So it's just easy to get around. So even if you're a little bit outside the city, that sounds fantastic. And just being able to live in a French household and soak in some of that culture and get to know the neighbors. That would have been amazing. And when you went into Paris, what were a couple of your favorite things to do there?
I mean, we of course went to all the iconic, the Champs-Élysées, the Eiffel Tower, all the iconic things that everybody does. But I liked also getting outside of the city, like the Palace of Versailles is definitely a bit of a trip, and you've got to set aside some time to do it. But on a summer weekend, it is amazing. They do this sort of water fountain show, fireworks show that happens every Saturday throughout the summers. And it very much lives up to all the hype. It is somewhere that you definitely want to book out a day of your trip and get to the Palace of Versailles. I would say if you've got more than 3 days, at least. If you've only got 3 days, you probably want to just stick to Paris itself. But anything more than 3 days, I would very much add on the Palace of Versailles. How about you? What's your favorite things?
Well, I mean, same thing. All the iconic things. I love Versailles as well. I feel like Versailles is perfect. If you're visiting in the summer and you're so sick of the crowds and it's hot and whatever, you just want to get out of the city for a day. I mean, Versailles can be very busy as well, but it's kind of out there in the woods a little bit and just kind of a nice relief. One of my favorite things that I've done in the last few years was I love seeing cities from different perspectives. So I did this motorcycle tour where it sounds a little bit more badass than it actually was, which was I was not riding a motorcycle. I was actually in the sidecar. So so it wasn't
Not so badass. No.
it was not so badass. If you're picturing me with like a leather jacket and like super cool, that was not what it was. So I was wearing my cargo shorts and I was in a sidecar. But
Did they give you the big goggles at least?
I think I had the goggles. I'm gonna have to look back at my photos. When I picture myself with the goggles. I really do, and looking just as nerdy as possible, But it was awesome because they take you past. You go down, around Place de la Concorde, and you go down to the Champs-Élysées and past the Seine, and you are in the flow of traffic. You're not in a taxi cab. You're not in an Uber. You're out and you're in the open and you're seeing all these things, from this sidecar. So I love that. And then just the conversation with the guide, with the guy who was actually riding the motorcycle. He was a Parisian, who'd lived his whole life there and had all these amazing insights to share. So kind of a slightly offbeat thing to do. Maybe not something you do on your very first day or your first visit, but a great way to see the city, from a different perspective. Yeah.
And did you already say or do you remember what the name of the company that you did?
I'm trying. I should have had that for this, but I'll put it in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes. Right?
Yeah. Because I don't have it. I could look it up now, but anyway, we'll put it in the show notes for sure.
I mean, in terms of seeing the city from another perspective, one of the things that we really enjoyed that was actually recommended by our host family out of Dordogne was the I hate doing like hop on, hop off buses, and I never do a hop on, hop off bus in a city. Yeah. But Paris has got the aquatic version of that, the bateau bus that goes around the Seine, and it really is a great way to see like all the major attractions in the city. You jump on and off these boats, super easy way and quite affordable way. Like they were saying, whenever they've got people visiting the city, even though it is a bit touristy, it's something they always do. And I thought it was a great way to get around the city.
I love that. I've done that as well. And I feel like, old European cities, cities that are ancient like Paris, they were built not for roads. They were built not for, kind of our modern conveyances. They were built for boats and ships. And so I always feel like you're seeing the city from its truest perspective, speaking of perspectives, when you're seeing it from the water, because that's what the city was built for. It was built for the water. So I love doing the bateau bus or the bateau mouche in Paris. That's an absolute must for me as well.
For sure. Now, Paris, obviously a city known as a great foodie destination.
Yes.
So many places to choose from and so many great things to experience in terms of food there. But were there any standouts for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can talk about, how many Michelin stars there are in this city and all the upscale dining and for sure, French cuisine is renowned around the world. But I'm going to recommend a place that's a little bit weird, a little bit quirky, maybe not for everyone, but it's up in Montmartre, which is, the traditional artists neighborhood. It's been a bit gentrified since then, but and it's a place called Refuge des Fondus, and it's a fondue place where you can do a meat fondue. So they actually bring out a pot of boiling oil, and you can put meat. They bring raw meat and oil. You make your own steak, little chunks of steak, or you can do a cheese one or a chocolate one as well, more of a traditional bread and cheese. But it's a tiny little hole in the wall. It's 2 long tables. Everybody sits at 2 long tables. So if you're sitting on the bench side, you actually have to step on the table. And they have a whole method where you step on a chair, step on the table, and then step on the other side to be able to sit down. And like, if you have to go to the bathroom, too bad. Wait till the end of the meal because you've probably got 10 people on one side, 10 people on the other. But the food is good. The fondue is fantastic. You don't often see this kind of meat fondue. And the guys there, and I mean, I should point out the most obvious weird thing about it, which is that they serve wine in baby bottles. And I've been told like 10 different stories for why this is. Somebody once told me, I think that the French at the time when they founded the restaurant taxed wine by the glass. So if they served it in a different type of different type of conveyance, that it would be not be taxed or not as heavily, so they put it all in baby bottles. Like, I'm sure that's not the case anymore, but it's just one of those weird things where they're all coming out with trays just full of baby bottles. I've never seen that anywhere else, And so you get your package deal, your meat fondue and your baby bottle wine, and people sing songs, and you never leave without making a new friend. Like, it's really that kind of atmosphere where it's rollicking and it's raucous and everyone's sipping from the baby bottles, and it's great. So that's my recommendation.
That's a very good recommendation. Mine would probably be you were mentioning all the Michelin starred restaurants in town.
Yeah.
And probably one of the first Michelin starred restaurants we went to, Joel Robuchon's restaurant on the Champs-Elysees. He's sort of the French equivalent of Gordon Ramsay, I guess, so with his
Wonderful.
chain of restaurants around the world. And one of the things that really impressed me was it was definitely on the more spendy side for sure. That they only had tasting menu, so you had to go with the tasting menu if you're going. And we were going with 2 young kids, so we were a bit hesitant to bring our children who are quite young at the restaurant, and we're worried how they would fit in there. And the staff was just like so welcoming. They had this believe it or not, a foosball table where the it was all like crystal, and they were like, I was terrified that the kids were going to break it, but they were like encouraging the kids to come try out the crystal foosball table. They cordoned off a section of the restaurant for us. They wouldn't even let us pay for the kids' meal. I doubt that's something they do all the time, but it was just, they were super friendly and generous, and not necessarily what you would sometimes you expect going into a Michelin star restaurant. It might be a little bit more difficult to go with family, and that was not the case at all there.
No, and sometimes it's the atmosphere makes the meal, right? When you feel comfortable and welcome, that's you're halfway there. So that sounds like an amazing experience. Yeah,
and the meal was amazing. It was,
of course,
the top 2 or 3 meals we have ever eaten. It was
of
phenomenal.
Of course, Michelin star in Paris. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Yeah.
And pretty iconic where it is too, that you basically step out the door and you've got the Arc de Triomphe right there outside the restaurant as well.
Amazing. Yeah.
Where do you like to stay when you're in Paris?
Well, I mean, I've stayed in all kinds of places. I mean, when I first started going, I was a backpacker and stayed in youth hostels with 16 beds in the room or whatever. Definitely my favorite place was much more recent, when I visited as a travel writer. I stayed at the Park Hyatt. I think it's Vendôme is the Park Hyatt. So right in the middle of everything, walking distance to some of the, pretty much everything you'd want to see in central part of Paris, Notre Dame, the Seine, everything. And then beautiful suites. And I remember the first day, you have these, the French often have these kind of garage door windows that close, and they like shut out all the noise. And I remember the first morning that I woke up, all jet lagged and everything, opening up that window and looking out, and it was just like a painting of Paris. Somebody was like riding a bike with a baguette, bag on the handlebars, and it was just like seeing the best of Paris, just out the window, everything right there. So that's my recommendation. What about you? What's your go-to place?
I mean, because we were on the home exchange, we didn't stay in a ton of places, but we did stay at a great Airbnb that, if it's, I'll have to double check and see if it's still up and running or not, because it was a local doctor who, when he was traveling, would put his place up on Airbnb and had a rooftop with a hot tub, a pool table, very cool, like rooftop overlooking the city. In his Airbnb. It was a very unique, cool Airbnb. So hopefully, if that one's still around, I'll put a link to it down in the notes. But also, as always, we always stay at all the places we can on points. The Renaissance Arc de Triomphe was phenomenal. An amazing place, amazing views, and very central location. And I know Marriott's just opened a new Moxie hotel. They're sort of more value based brand.
Yeah.
For like 120, 130 euros a night, sometimes you can find rooms there in a very central location, very sort of boutique style, hotel there as well.
Yeah. Moxies are cool. I stayed in a Moxie once in Athens, and the check-in counter was the same as the bar. So you would just sit there, and people would be checking in, and then people would be like, they'll store their bags for a minute, come and have a drink at the bar, and you got to know people in the hotel. It was this kind of communal feel that you don't get in a lot of modern hotels. Great design touches. I love that Moxie.
That's definitely got some cool elements to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea is, you're not going to spend much time in your room anyway. It's going to be right in the heart of the city. You're going to be out exploring, but when you come back, you're going to have a comfortable bed and even though it is a tiny, maybe a pretty small space. So yeah.
Any final can't miss or hidden treasure?
I always like to do a can't miss and a hidden treasure. For my can't miss, for sure, it's something that I do every single time I go to Paris, and that's sunset at Sacré-Cœur. So there's this church, Sacré-Cœur Church, white domes up in Montmartre, and it overlooks the city. And people just gather there at sunset, and the whole city is just spread out at your feet. You can see pretty much all of the Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, everything. And people bring, you'll have a guy playing the guitar and couples with sharing a bottle of wine. And that whole kind of very Parisian feel is there. It kind of for me, it all comes together when I go to sunset at Sacré-Cœur. And then for my hidden treasure, it's going to be a little bit of a surprising one. To go up Montparnasse Tower, which Montparnasse, if you don't know, is like probably the most hated building in Paris, because I don't know the history and why it happened, but there's this modern glassy tower that kind of sits amongst all the most beautiful buildings in Paris. But you can go up to the top, and there's a lookout, and or whatever they call it, an observation deck. And the great thing is that you get pretty much the best view in Paris. You got the Eiffel Tower, you got everything you want to see, but without having to see Montparnasse. So because you're at Montparnasse, so it's overlooked. I've only been once, but it was a beautiful view and a great way to again get another perspective on the city.
Amazing. Well, a couple of final things I would recommend is that we've got a video on our YouTube channel, a good video overview of Paris as well. If anyone wants to jump on and check that out, a lot of the places that we've talked about on the podcast today are featured in that video cast as well. And we're also going to have a downloadable guide to Paris available on our website at travelin10.com as well, with our recommended itinerary, more details on all the places that we've talked about in today's show as well. Next week we are going down to South America. Where are we headed next, Tim?
We're going to Buenos Aires. We're going to Buenos Aires. Yeah, an amazing city. I mean, Argentina is just such a fascinating country. So can't wait to chat with you about that city.
All right, we'll look forward to connecting next week. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much, David.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Voyescape Podcast Network. You can find all of our podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com.